A warm welcome to everyone who is joining us today for the presentation of the findings from our recent house hunting behaviour research. And we are recording today's session. My name is Nicola Brown and I am the Hub Services Director at Unipol. I'd like to introduce our panel that will be giving their thoughts on the findings after our research lead, Sarah Turner-Jones, has taken us through the main findings. So we're joined today by Jess Carrier, our National Code Coordinator, who alongside Sarah and myself has worked at every stage of the survey. And then we've got Callum McInnes, founder of Student Tribe. Callum, a big supporter of accreditation and helped us with the first draft of the survey and believes in the importance of offering quality student houses. And we've got Robin Walsh. Robin is Head of Residential Services at Bournemouth University. Robin has also assisted us with the first draft. He is a passionate advocate of best practice in the sector and enhancing the student experience. And finally, we have Nick Ems, marketing consultant at Accommodation for Students platform, an organisation that conducts their own research to understand students' experiences in accommodation, to encourage best practice, and has also kindly sponsored this piece of research. So Unipol has been conducting annual research into student house hunting experience at the local level in Leeds for over 5 years now. And each year we've used these results to help shape our approach to providing advice and guidance for the next cohort. This year we felt it was really important to capture a wider student voice as we sit on the edge of significant change for the student housing sector in England. This survey forms part of our wider research interests as we aim to document the effects of legislative change through the impending Renters' Rights Bill and the evolution of the higher education landscape more generally. So I'd like to hand across to Sarah now, our lead researcher and author of the report, to take us through the main results.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. Going to spend about 20 minutes just cantering through this. I'm sure you will have questions. The full report went live on Unipol's website on Friday. And so hopefully people have had a little bit of time to look at it. You can see that it covers quite a lot of related areas to do with house hunting, the circumstances students find themselves in, all of their kind of backstory and their voice. And so we're just going to kind of go through a whistle-stop tour and then leave hopefully quite a bit of time for discussion at the end. The first thing to say, this is about understanding student behaviour when house hunting after the first year. So what you're going to see in these results are not people who are applying to university, but people who are already at university going into the second year, or second years going into the third year, and so on. So it's quite an unusual study in that regard, that this is kind of capturing an evidence base which is not well documented. Many people that did go to university will identify with some of the results, but it does kind of show quite a few things and a demographic who are not normally captured in this kind of survey. So it's predominantly UK undergrads, as we'll go on to. And as Nicola said, this is about setting a baseline or drawing a line before the Renters' Rights Bill comes into existence. Lots of people, and I haven't said it in the presentation, but people don't know that this is coming. Students don't know this is coming. They obviously, it's an ever-changing piece of, prospective legislation, and so it's not that people have a very high awareness of renters' rights. It's more that the behaviour of students will be impacted as a result of that legislation. So this is really to show what it looks like right now. First thing, we were very pleased to get such a good response rate. So we had 37 organisations send the link out to their students, mostly universities, but also students' unions. So thank you all for taking part. We got 7,478 students who are active in the housing market right now. And as you can see, predominantly undergrad and predominantly UK and predominantly first years, but there were some returners as well. So it's, as I said, this kind of group of people who our main market group moving from university accommodation into either the housing market or PBSA, and it happened this year. Overall, Manchester makes up about 20% of the results, but we had these 11 cities that make up about 80%, and that they feature in the report to give people a kind of regional spread as to what the results really look like and how they vary. There are some expensive cities, there are some undersupplied cities, but there is a spread. And then there's this other 489 students who came from all over the place, and 13 people who wanted, lucky people, who wanted to go to Madrid and other places in the world. So obviously, we've focused down at every level on the people who we, can have a say over and who are telling us something about the UK market. What are they mainly looking for? 56% of them are looking for a rented student house. But there is also a whole host of other things going on in terms of people who want to share between students and professionals who have some quite interesting different requirements in terms of their accommodation. Quite a small number for PBSA for returners. So we do an awful lot in the sector understanding PBSA and students who want to go into it. This is a very small cohort in comparison with those other surveys. So it's just useful kind of keeping in mind that we're talking about people who are interested in shared houses to a great extent here. And yeah, as it says there, a few people who are interested in going back into university accommodation. Ideal room types: shared houses, either a standard room or an ensuite room, come up a lot. It's interesting because ensuite rooms in houses are not typically what we think of when we think of HMO. And we don't know if it's because this product really exists or whether there's just an expectation that once you've lived in an ensuite room in PBSA, you're immediately, and automatically going to find one in a house. So I thought that was really interesting, and that students keep their options open in terms of they don't just search for one room type, they're searching for 2 and a bit room types. They're not fixed, they're just what's out there. How easy is it to find accommodation? Now, this kind of question basically is a baseline question for renters' rights bill. So we'll be able to use this in future to look at whether things are changing as the market changes in response to the when it is enacted, the renters' rights bill. Overall, people scored it almost 6 out of 10 difficult to find a rented student house. It's far harder to find a house if you want to find one shared between students and professionals. But these are just the kind of baseline scores. But it also says it's much harder to find a house in Bristol and York than it is in places like Leeds and Birmingham. And this is all down to the supply characteristics of those markets. And that comes up again and again in this survey, that there are obviously, as we all, anyone who works in the sector knows, great variation between different housing markets. What are people looking for? Affordable rent. That's what people are saying. 76% tick the box. Also close to uni, bills included. So it's all about the kind of metrics and characteristics of the property, and then there's some things then about the people involved. So I need a good flatmate. I need my flatmates to be nice. I need my landlord to be trustworthy, etc. At the moment, people are not expressing a preference for flexible tenancies, but neither are they being offered them. So I don't know how much we can really read into that at the minute. And one thing that we can also say, which is really interesting, is what people don't look for as being very important. And, large social spaces, cinemas, being in, gyms and sports passes are not so important to returning students as they might be for first years. And I think there's a great deal of research done by PBSA providers about what things mean to people at different stages in their journey. But that's just how this particular cookie crumbled. So if we think affordability is the thing that people want the most, it's also the thing that they find it most difficult to find. And what we mean by affordability is not something that we went into in this very wide-ranging survey, but rents that you can afford. Let's say it like that. And another thing that I think will be really interesting to go into in future will be the difficulty in finding suitable accommodation. Because what do we mean by suitable? So it's like you can find a house, but is it the right kind of house? Is it providing the right kind of accommodation for you and your group? Does it have the right credentials in terms of location? Is it working for people who have different needs and requirements? And the survey goes into some of these issues separately, but I think this issue of suitable accommodation is something, for us as a sector to think about. Next thing to say, the regional variation comes through very clearly, really, when we look again at these cities, that actually Bristol and York have both the worst affordability problems and the greatest perceived shortage of accommodation. So at one end, you've got Bristol and York and London being difficult markets, and at the other end, Leeds and Birmingham, where people are saying affordability isn't so bad and shortages aren't so bad in Leeds and Birmingham. Affordability, breaking it down by people who are looking for rented houses, there's a gap, and yeah, basically outside of London, that gap is £34 a week. So what we had asked is essentially, what is it that you thought you were going to be able to spend when you started your house hunt versus how much you actually being expected to find? And so this gap is something that is just coming out fairly consistently. But obviously in London and Bournemouth and Oxford, that gap is much greater than in the markets of Leeds and Manchester and Birmingham, where that gap is in the 12 to £20 a week rather than the 64, I think it is in London, £64 a week. So it's just interesting to see that we can kind of pick that up, and that there are other surveys. If I think a conversation for students had a similar result of this kind of gap in some of their work, and that's covered in a report. Not only is there a gap, but the gap isn't necessarily evident at the beginning of the search. 71% of respondents are saying that they had to find more money as they started searching. So it's a really tricky situation, having to kind of re-budget as you go along. And that might be because they didn't have a good expectation of what the market would really be. And Accommodation for Students survey actually said it's to do with keeping up with your friends as well. You might need a slightly nicer house than the one you'd originally set out to get, just to keep up with your group. So I thought that was quite interesting, because we didn't ask that particular question of why it changed. But what we did see as well is that students who'd been in the house hunting market time and time again, so people who were either third or second years moving into their subsequent year of housing, had to find even more money this year than they had before. So it's almost, there is this real-time additional rent that you need to find, and the market being hotter over the last few years has just meant that rent increases have been faster, which had been a surprise to people who've been around for a little while. So it's interesting to see that come through, because we see it come through in the kind of big data on rents. Rent increases are faster until this year. This won't be much of a surprise to anyone. You get to university, you meet your friends. 1 month later, you have to go and find a house and live with them. You might not have found the right people. And, this has been happening. It's not a surprise that people have to go immediately into the house hunting market. But people who are experiencing this are pretty surprised. And it's like, it shouldn't be a surprise, because 20 years later, anyone who'd been in the market would know that that was going to happen. But it just seems that students are not being prepared to immediately come to uni, settle in, and go and find a house. And it really does need to be better signposted, better managed, because it's the amount of comments that came back saying how uh, surprising and kind of horrifying people had found this process is it comes through in a great level of detail. So it's a key takeaway really that it just needs to be managed. What students wish they had known with the power of AI, these responses are so much easier to to kind of collate. But this is what people were saying is, you know, affordable issues of affordability are coming through loud and clear. Rents, deposits, guarantors, all the things that we would expect, but people are saying it in real time. You know, we haven't got the money, or we didn't realize that our loans were not going to cover the rent, etc., etc. Budgeting is really hard. The market moves really quickly, so there's a whole raft of things that are reported in the document where you can see all of that playing out. What you can also see is, yeah, just the shock that's coming out about the process of going and finding a house, and also who to live with and how you might choose who you live with, because your best and most exciting friends might not be the tidiest and quietest housemates. And so, there's all these things that people are finding out at the age of 18 that, people just, they're not prepared. And they, I think some of the things that come out, it's just so nice to see it in today's student voice. Where's your money coming from? Maintenance loans, grants, it's actually coming from two or more sources of finance, and family support there being a huge one, and also income from employment. Not in itself a surprise, it's just the reliance on multiple sources of finance being the key finding. How do you see your financial situation? Half of people are not doing that well, including a quarter of the people who are constantly worried about their finances. So this whole thing of financial strain coming through loud and clear from the student body. Work, and interestingly, if there are lots of surveys, the Happy Student Academic Experience survey asks people about work. We've asked them as well, and the diversity of work patterns is something which is really interesting how it's coming through. So 57% of respondents had a job alongside their studies, which is slightly lower than the Happy survey, which I think is 65%. And yeah, 22% of respondents had a job all year round. So, this thing of trying to kind of work out how and when people are working in all kinds of ways, all kinds of time of the year. People are working way more hours in the vacation periods. But, and yeah, it's just, you can't predict it. You just got to try as a set of organizations to accommodate, all of these different diverse ways. At the same time, people are getting parental or familial contributions. And again, this is really diverse. Some people really are getting a massive amount of money from their families on a monthly basis, and some are getting hardly any. What we did, and obviously there are care leavers and the people who didn't get any support from their parents, and that will be for a lot of different reasons. But it's interesting that 1,300 people told us the amount of their monthly family contribution to their living costs, which is a piece of information I don't know has ever really been captured elsewhere. So it's really cool to be able to see this. So over the whole student body, including internationals and postgrads and undergrads and everybody, it was £506 a month. But for UK undergrads, this contribution is £415 a month. This is a busy chart. But what I was trying to do is work out who are the people who feel best off. So at this end where I've got this kind of lozenge of red, people who are very worried or just getting by most likely only have their job. They don't have a job and family support. If you have a job and family support, you're most likely to say you're comfortable enough. And again, if you're only being funded by your family, these are people who appear in the survey to be from, wealthy backgrounds and don't have to work necessarily. So it's just to kind of show here that unless you come from somewhere where you, have the comfort of money, or that your parents are supporting you at the same time as your job, um, you're doing, this is the most comfortable place to be a student. If you only have a job, or if you have nothing, then you're in this more worrisome situation. And having done the maths, and we actually compared the findings from this survey with the HEPI survey that came out just earlier in the month in August, which is the minimum income standards, like how much money do you actually need to be a UK undergrad, who feels who feels like they've got enough money to live. And what we found is, in both cases, you need your family and a parental contribution in order to get by in comfort as a student. And I know that the government expect people to find this money, but they don't say it very loud, and they never have. But it just comes through again very clearly that you need it. You can't work sufficient hours to fill the gap if you don't have that support. We asked a whole load of other questions, and there was a route for people who actually were living more than 30 minutes from their university. So why were they doing that? And there was a route for people who were living at home, but there was also a route for people who'd actually decided to live further away, and they were living further away on purpose to find cheaper rent. And some of them were saying that they could get better quality housing further away from the student housing market as well. So there's a whole load of recommendations. The first one, universities, so many roles. First of all, your role in refurbishing and repurposing, making sure that, as many creative ideas as could be had to bring forward affordable accommodation are kind of taking place as they possibly can. So this is very supportive of widening participation, just making sure that rent options are there, as everyone knows. And, universities are working really hard on this. I think there is this role about house hunting when you become a second plus year student. People are still so surprised, and it sounds like information, advice, and guidance is still really needed, and really needs to find other ways of getting communicated to students so that this level of surprise can be reduced in future. When the Renters' Rights Bill comes through as an act, communicating to students about their new rights is another role, which will be needed by universities. And then supporting new supply coming through. So working with the planning teams, etc., in your local authorities to make sure that needs are really understood, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. And supporting commuters, which I know has been very big in some universities for a long time. Private providers, keep doing what you're doing. We haven't majored on telling PBSA what to do in this report, because that's not the role of it. But I think one thing that really did come out was the number of returning students who hadn't got other people to live with, who wanted to move into PBSA because it was somewhere where they could continue their lifestyle, and just go about their business without worrying about struggling to find a flatmate, etc. The student HMO market will come on to, and then, of course, all the things that everybody wants: diversity of stock, affordability, value for money at all price ranges. There's a big section in the report about government, understanding the role of HMOs in the market, the fact that the Renters' Rights Bill is another threat to the supply of HMOs, that they are necessary and desirable, that you can't replace them with other forms of housing if they're lost to a market, and that they are being lost. That the legislation in Scotland, which we've talked about in the report, has led to a reduction in the number of HMOs in the market, and the number which are being used by students, because it's easier and less risk to offer houses to other tenants, really, people who are not going to cause you a void in the summer, etc. So, there's just a big note in the report which is about the risk of reducing the choice for students at a time when we really need it. The interesting one as well, local government. Understand your market. Some are really, really trying to do this and are working very collaboratively with the universities to ensure that they really get what stock is needed, what kind of stock and where, so that they can bring forward the right kind of planning schemes in collaboration with the whole market. So that is a hugely important call for all local authorities, really. And then the other one, which we all need to work on together, is about recognizing the value of students as parts of the community. So it's not just that students need to live in houses, it's that students stay in your community. They are future talent. They are your future workforce. So don't just treat them as people who are inconvenient. This is how you actually grow your economy in the future, is by providing housing now. And so there you go. It's really about the fact that this report has captured this evidence base. It's told us lots of things that I think haven't been captured before about people's behaviour and circumstances. It's captured their voice. And also we've tried to kind of relate that to what the market can do to support them. So thank you very much. And I will hand over.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks very much for taking us through those findings. A question, I guess, from me to you to start with. I mean, when you were doing this, sort of looking at the results and kind of crunching your numbers, was there anything in particular that stood out to you that you found particularly surprising? Because you do a lot of this research. So what really struck you from it?
I think how open people were about their family contribution, how many people had given us that number, was really interesting. It's something that we don't get to see, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not like we ask them and we might in future go, tell us your grant and tell us your family contribution, because actually then we'd be able to really see a lot more about this minimum income standard and whether people really are making it, because it's still a kind of unknown. But the fact that so many had received this parental contribution, and the fact that governments say that it's necessary, but now we can see the level that people are actually achieving. I think it's just more weight. It just carries more weight. It gives us more credibility or more evidence to be able to say how important that contribution is.
Yeah, I'm recognizing that absolutely. I think again for me, obviously that was really, really interesting, all the work around the kind of affordability and financial security. I thought the timing of the search is always interesting to me, and how students respond to that question. And as we know, government has put in place a restriction to only allow landlords to use 4A grounds for possession where tenancies were signed within 6 months of the contract commencement date. And I think with the aim really to try and encourage house hunting to start later. So we'll see how that affects things. But evidence from previous research has shown much of the pressure actually is peer-led. And where there's a shortage of a particular type of accommodation. And I guess I would argue that this legislation could lead to a loss of more HMO properties, and therefore putting more pressure on that early renting experience for students. But we'll have to see. So please do keep putting your questions into the Q&A, and we'll pick those up as we go along. But I'm going to pass across to my lovely colleague Jess to give her thoughts on the research findings. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Nicola. I'm not going to talk for too long because we want to obviously hear from our lovely external speakers, but just on, I think similar to Sarah, there's a lot of this that isn't super surprising, but I think it just reaffirms the work we need to do and the pressure to get some to put some things in place that address some of these concerns, because obviously we're getting a lot, if you're looking across our research and things that HEPI are doing, things accommodation for students have done as well themselves as well in other reports, the similar things are coming up over and over again. So it reaffirms that we know what the problems are, but the work needs to start very soon for us to address them. I think the big takeaway for me, again, similar to what Sarah said, is that big piece around the funding gaps. So the parental contribution, that average being over £500. I think for a long time when we've done the accommodation cost survey series, we've always looked at, we know that rents are going up every year, and we look at that in relation to the average loan, and obviously you can then calculate in monetary value the funding gap that's missing. But because we're surveying providers, we've never been able to necessarily put a direct tag onto where the money's coming from in terms of our parents contributing as much as we think they might be. So we've always had to have a much more nuanced view, whereas now to have a figure on that we can then take forward to kind of illustrate some of the funding gaps in future research is really, really helpful, because given the way things are going, you can only imagine that contribution in a lot of instances may have to get bigger, and particularly I imagine will vary, very dependent on wherever the student wants to go study. And again, that consideration for families where there's what we call the squeezed middle, where there may be multiple children in the same household at university at the same time. If you've got two children at university at the same time, you're looking at over £1,000 potentially to get them through, to get them somewhere safe to live while they're away from home. And the additional money per week, I think, is really interesting, and students' perceptions of what the market is like, and whether again, is that peer pressure? Is that them all saying, what have you got to spend? Let's set a base figure. Is that not enough information from the university? Is it just changes in the market year on year? And obviously these extraordinary changes we've seen over the past few years. And again, I think gives us the kind of impetus to do more work to try and understand that a bit better. But again, I think focuses on the fact that students' perception of affordability is that things aren't affordable because they're already having to add more into their budgets on top of what they think is already affordable. And I think the case of finding housing and the ease of finding housing as well is based on their perception of what they want and not supply generally, I think, as we look at it. And I think you'll see a lot of reports that say there's a chronic shortage of housing, I think, particularly in relation to PBSA and why we should be building more and more PBSA beds. But generally, I think we need to not look at this. You need to look at this in a local context, and we need to build the right type of buildings in the right places, rather than just saying there's a shortage of beds and then building things just to fight the market. Because what we see with local authorities, in a way I'm trying to word this, is a lot of the time with local authorities, it's reusing space and what can we build here that's going to regenerate a space. But actually, we need to think about first generation assets, refurbishing and repurposing things. And actually, how does this build into, as Sarah touched on, that joint working and how we embed students as parts of communities? Where are they living? A lot of the time you'll hear local residents say, all this student accommodation development that pops up in the city centre. But actually Leeds is a very good example of where there's assets being built actually in the periphery of the city as well. And it's kind of bringing in that need to improve those transport links and forcing different stakeholders to talk to each other because these assets have been built in different places. So yeah, I think in terms of recommendations, I think we have this recommendation on joint working in every report that we have, but I think there's a big variance in terms of the local authority approach in particular. From a national code perspective, we always see very, very varying understandings of the student housing market and local needs assessments, depending on the local authority. And again, different relationships between local authorities and universities in each city as well. So perhaps some central intervention there. We know Nottingham's kind of leading the way on a lot of this work as well. So there is some good practice already there about how we can replicate it elsewhere as well, and building towards something we at Unipol want to push for is that national student housing strategy, and having kind of a centralized approach, and again one that acknowledges the importance of small HMOs and doesn't just accept the fact that the supply is declining, but actually looking at what's replacing it. If not HMOs, if it is PBSA, what are we building, and is it the right type of asset in the right place? And I think, again, we always say because of the financial constraints, it's very difficult to innovate and be very creative in terms of PBSA products. I think, investors know what works and what they like and what will get bums in seats, essentially. But I think, there needs to be sort of somebody to be brave and have a radical look at the types of buildings that we're building, and whether it needs to be all bells and whistles, because as Sarah's pointed out as well, there's amenity levels that people aren't necessarily looking for. They're just looking, what are they actually looking for in terms of what matches their budget, and is that achievable? And I think overall, just to finish off before I hand back to Nicola, is ultimately the thing that's at risk if we don't look at this is accessibility to higher education, and participation's at risk. Not just for home students, for international students as well. If we want to continue to be an attractive option for overseas students, we need to be able to cater to all types of budgets and be able to offer products that suit everybody. And the notion of people just saying, oh, well, there'll be just an increase in commuter students and people should just go to their local university, and that's great. Commuting is a really good option, and it is the best option for a lot of students. But I think my main takeaway is that students should always have a choice. If they want to move away to go to university, that should be their choice. So again, anything that can enable choice, I think, would be my main takeaway from this as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jess, for that varied. Yeah, that's really, really good. Thanks. Lots of really useful insights there. I'm going to go to Nick now. Do you want to give us your thoughts, Nick?
Yeah, sure, will do. Thank you. So I think one thing I just wanted to highlight really that I sort of came out of the research for me is just the importance of HMO. I think one of the things that I've been frustrated with is that sometimes it's positioned as it's a sort of a bit of a distressed decision for students, but actually students really like living in HMO. And it's not just the numbers, it's that relationship and that part of the university experience. I thought that came out really strongly. And I think there is obviously this concern that it's kind of some of that stock's going to leak out into the longer term tenancy sector, and what that impact might have. So I think that's a legitimate concern. We obviously don't know what is exactly going to happen, and sometimes, things don't quite play out as you expect, but that is obviously a danger. And then I think the only other 2 points that I really wanted to pick up on, I think what came out for me was this theme of students being stressed, finding it difficult to find accommodation, find it difficult to find affordable accommodation and pay for it. Just to highlight, I mean, we've got nearly 60% of students saying they're working, but actually I picked up, Sarah, that nearly 30% wanted to work but couldn't find a job. So
Yeah.
that pressure is real. So I think, and we also find students saying they're quite stressed about this. So it is important. And final point really is about, I think, communication. So 5% of students understand what this is about. That's a tiny proportion, and it's really important to get that comms piece right. The surprise that students are finding rents, how expensive it is, how different it is. We need to do much better at communicating that. A lot of university information on cost of living is out of date. I know Jim Dickinson did a piece kind of highlighting the difference between what's on the university website and reality. So in one city, I think the uni was saying it's £572 for a HMO. Actually, the price now is £623. We all need to do better at that in terms of communicating what that, what it actually costs to go to university, so students are sort of understanding what they're letting themselves in for. And I think it's really important for us to get involved with that. So organisations like Accommodation for Students. And then sort of finally, one of my key takeaways is we've got to try and protect our HMOs. So one of the important things is try and support our landlords, make sure they understand the implications of renters' rights, do what we can to develop products and services to help them so that we can try and maintain that stock and keep a sort of balanced housing market, which is going to make it, introduce a level of affordability.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nick. Thanks for that. To Callum, please.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you very much to Sarah and to Unipol and AFS for financing this particular report. I think it's really, really helpful. very timely, some great data and information in the report. So anybody has a chance to have a look through it, please do so. Now, I hate coming after somebody who does exactly the same thing as me, because we're inevitably going to cross over in what we're going to say. So you just have to bear with me a little bit. But everything that Nick says is something that I would echo. It is a fantastic and wonderful acknowledgement of the fact that the HMO sector is an important and relevant place for students. And I think we need to wave this report in front of government. We need to wave this report in front of universities and the local councils as well, because as Nick was alluding to, the ability to have communications as a landlord, and I'm speaking as a landlord here, is very minimal when it comes to speaking to the local councils and the universities. I think as landlords, the most communication we get from those two authorities is really just a noise abatement letter saying, can you sort out your house? But nothing that's of, frankly, a great deal of really practical use and putting their arms around us as a very relevant and important part of servicing what is, in terms of students, a major cohort. 75% of the students are domestic. They pretty much all favour the HMO market. They're all very mostly financially sensitive, and so we are the dirty secret that has kept the university sector going in terms of accommodation, and it needs to be acknowledged that we are a sector that's putting our socks up. We're much better at what we do now. We look after the students considerably better. And this report absolutely nails it from that perspective. If you look at page 7, it says, in very strong terms, and thank you for this, Sarah, the student HMO market should be protected if the sector wants students from all backgrounds and budgets to have access to university. Now, I've never heard anybody talk about protecting. Are we an endangered species? Well, maybe you could say we are, but we do have a very important role to play. And we would love, I think it's fair to say, to engage more with universities and with local councils. And to give Sarah her due, she mentioned about, in the next couple of paragraphs, how local government and universities can up their comms game, as Nick was alluding to get more involved with the HMO landlords. And maybe the Renters' Rights Bill is something that can be used as an opportunity for those institutions to engage with the landlord a lot more actively. And we are paying a fair price for our licenses, and we'd like to think that we're getting something back for it, certainly in terms of communications as to what they actually think they want from us going forward. So, there's a lot to go for here, and I'm very pleased that this report absolutely nails it from the point of view of the importance of what we offer. So that's my main message. And secondly, with my other hat on, I've been involved in the Renters' Rights Bill, and it's just pitiful that only 5% of students have heard of the Renters' Rights Bill and its implications. Something really needs to be done, and I'd be interested to know, Robin, from your perspective, what is being done from your side, and what universities are doing, what local councils are doing, because we're not hearing anything as landlords yet. It's obviously still not yet passed into law, so there is something of a delay, I guess. But it's important that news is sent out there ASAP. It's when the law passes to students and to landlords, and we all know what to expect, because we're still having conversations as to what kind of contracts and how and when will the letting season start and finish. There's still so much uncertainty, and that needs to be sorted out. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed, and happy to help if there are any questions.
Thank you, Callum. And just across to Robin, please.
Right, thanks, Nicola. Difficult going last, isn't it? Because obviously I'm kind of like just thinking, yeah, I agree with all of that. I'll just say, yeah, as everybody else said. So I'm just trying to think of some different kind of angles, really. Linking in with the affordability information that's here, I think that's really important. Everyone's made that same point. I think what's kind of not been said today, but it's been said. I've said it in different forums many times, and there are other people have as well. It's around the funding model that primarily supports students, which is their maintenance loans, and that the maintenance loan assessment criteria, so the household income brackets, they haven't moved. for many, many years. So what you're seeing is the reason that one of the main reasons that students are finding it harder and harder year on year is because less and less of them are getting the maximum loan. So you can see, I've looked at this data before, and that data's out there, and I think this would be something really interesting to get hold of, is to see kind of how that balance is changing over sort of the last sort of 6 or 7 years of how many students were getting the maximum, and now they're sort of moving down towards the minimum. And I think personally, I think it's around that sort of like the majority now are getting less than the sort of the average loan. So I think that's a real point. And then also as well within that, again, around sort of communication of this, is the household income. And I think it is, I pick up on Sarah's point, I think that is the really great piece of information that's been pulled out of here, is actually that authentic student voice of telling us how much they're actually having to rely on on other sources of income, their jobs or their family or friends or whatever. And actually that those students and those families are coming to university, perhaps not understanding that is going to be the case until actually the crunch happens, and then they're like, "Oh, you need how much money?" So, again, that information is just not there. It's just not being shared with applicants and their families when they're looking and thinking about going to university. And there's this kind of like, I just think there's more and more of a concern now within the sector of how many students and their families, I've said this before, is that generational now. You could have potentially in a few years' time, you could have households where there's 2 generations holding student debt. And, and if that happens, then it's kind of like, what's the value of this? So, that's a concern. I think that's a concern that needs to be thought about. I think having the healthy market, absolutely, HMOs do need to be protected. This report brings very much onto the map of the importance of HMOs. It's about having choice. It's about having a ladder of rents, different types of accommodation for different kind of needs, different interests in. So I do like that. There is one bit that's not been mentioned, is around that students, respondents had said that they don't see the value there wasn't around sort of large social spaces and cinema rooms in PBSA. So I know we haven't talked too much about PBSA here, but so just to mention that, I think strongly, and I've thought this for a while now, is that there are older halls of residence where you don't have these the bells and whistles, as Jess mentioned, and I think there's a really strong market there for a sort of a mid-range hall of residence offer that's it's clean, it's well maintained, it's good quality, and there's fantastic customer service, and it's well marketed, and it's reflected in a price. You can have your bells and whistles top end PBSA, which unfortunately the marketing teams love those. But I think there's a mid-range product there. So again, it's about having a mixed portfolio across the whole sector. And I think just the final point that I want to sort of say is picking up on perhaps on Callum, one of Callum's last points there is around what are we doing. So I think that there's a lot of it's quite easy to sort of say that universities, local authorities have a big role to play here. They should be talking to each other. I think the challenge that we've got is that that's something very, very easy to say. And if you work in a university or local authority, you'll probably then be in a position to say it's very hard to do, because the priorities of a lot of these universities and local authorities now are not student accommodation. A lot of them are firefighting on very, very restricted budgets. They are planning, year on year at the moment to make ends meet. And I think the solution to that is about, if you are involved in student accommodation in universities, and I'm looking at the 52 attendees who are listening now, and if you are involved in a student union, you've just got to keep saying it, just getting it onto agendas, trying to get it up to the VC, get it up to your university leadership teams, and really push it. Because without their support and their buy-in and their understanding, then we're only going to be talking to each other within this forum. And we all agree what needs to happen. But you need the support of the leadership teams in your university, but also as well in the local authorities, and that's really hard.
Robin, just a quick question on that, actually. There's something I was going to mention, because one thing that comes out of the research really strongly as well is this difference between cities. So some cities really expensive, some cities being perceived as being relatively easy to find accommodation. Do you see a situation where universities might start to get concerned if, you know, it's really difficult and really expensive to find accommodation? And do you think that might start to get it more on the agenda?
Yeah, I mean, yes, is the answer to that. But again, it's about. I think that's already happening though, and I just think that perhaps that information is not getting through to the right people within the universities to make it a priority. They don't. I think that some universities will, you know, they will just see something that student accommodation is just something that happens after the students have accepted their offer. They'll, you know, yeah, they need a bit of information. They need a website to kind of go to, but they'll find something, you know, and that's the sort of that, you know, they don't understand the complexities and also the risks and the challenges to future recruitment. And I think that, again, that's our kind of our responsibility to kind of sort of to drive that message to try and get it through.
Mm. I think it was interesting, wasn't it, Robin, that we started to see when we did our international student survey, we did start to see a bit more interest from this higher level at the universities. But once we got that sort of visa restrictions coming in, that kind of fell a little bit off of those kind of top level agendas, didn't it? When we started to see that accommodation, we started to see less of the shortages in certain areas, particularly in that sort of when we were looking around for family accommodation and that type of thing. So it was interesting to see that. So I absolutely agree. It's so important to get it in front of the right people to really, you know, lead that strategic change. So we have got a few questions. One sort of from, I think, this idea about PBSA, and I think it goes to your sort of point, Robin, around that sort of trying to look at how we can innovate, particularly in those kind of older buildings, and what can we do in that design side. So this person just said, if students prioritize en suites, proximity to uni and affordability, why the focus on a student house and a preconception they don't want PBSA? What can PBSA owners do to appeal more to returners? So I don't know whether that's maybe Sarah. Do you want to, Sarah or Jess? What do you think we can do with these buildings to make them more
I think
attractive?
actually, yeah. I mean, PBSA it's the most diverse thing ever. You know, when you think of where students can live, PBSA is providing a solution for every one of those students, working with universities or working on their own, you know, providing for first year students, doing lots and lots in the returner student market already. I think there is something about internationals being attracted to PBSA already because, you know, it's more akin to the style of housing that might be seen in a different market. You know, it's also very predictable. You can get in, bills are included, it's recognizable, you know, it's branded, it's trustworthy, you know, so there's like a lot of reasons why PBSA works for groups of students who are less involved in the intricacies of a UK housing market. I think the getting into the UK student market is about group bookings, friends, affordability, ease, convenience. You know, the convenient point is something that came out a lot in this report. Just, you know, people want their bills included. They want to be close. It's about kind of tapping into the messages that people are saying here. And I think also PBSA, you know, at the right price in the right location is going to be the answer to an awful lot of questions about market. It's just being able to provide that supply that meets the demand. That's the hardest part of it because of construction costs, rent, you know, the whole viability question, which people are grappling with every day. But if it can be done, then inevitably there will be more UK returning students living in PBSA because universities are bigger and they're taking more UK students. So, you know, it is a solution. It's just tap it in the right way.
Thank you. Jess, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, I think just to support what Sarah said, you know, there will be UK students needing to be in PBSA because if the supply of small HMOs goes down, there won't be a choice. And on one hand, I do want to say that I think in a lot of in a policy sense, I think when you speak to people in government, their rudimentary understanding of it is like, it's okay because purpose-built student accommodation will fill that gap. But actually, that question of viability, and people say there's shortages and there's a chronic shortage. But actually, if you look in a lot of places, there's buildings with lots of voids. It's because, in a lot of the time, it's like Sarah said, it's the right supply to meet the demand, and it's having assets priced at the right price for in the market at that time. And I think, again, agreeing with what everyone else has said, somebody being able to look at a different type of product and being the first person to say, actually, how can we and I think, one of the things that Unipol's pushed for in the past and some of the research that we've done, but I think particularly now, if we're looking to really be like, how can we tangibly solve or look to address the affordability question, is looking at these first generation assets and buildings that, potentially, and even for universities that might be on campus accommodation that they're considering maybe mothballing. It's like, how can you bring that into a up to standard and refurb it? We see a lot of refurbishments through the national code that come, bed spaces that get taken out for 1 or 2 years but come back and it's been refurbished, but actually it's a lot more expensive to match the price tag to be viable. But actually, what could you do to make that building, to spruce it up, but not put the rent up by, not to double the rent in some instances? So yeah, I think, again, pretty much like Rowan said, you end up echoing what everyone else says. But I think, there is a role for PBSA to play here. It's somebody has to, I think, be the first one to take that step, and who that will be, I think remains to be seen.
Interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at kind of these older buildings and what we potentially could do with them, I think, as you've all said, and I think it's also recognizing that students' choice of HMO is not always just because it's not always about affordability. It is about that rite of passage, that they actually making that conscious decision that that's their choice. So what can we do in these older buildings to replicate, if that's what we want to look at? It's not just about making it affordable, it's about the actual product design to make it something that students actually want to live in, and to have that feeling of being more independent and moving away from that kind of classic new first year PBSA experience, which we know is fantastic. But again, it's just trying to get something that's a bit more like that HMO experience. Sarah, did you want to come in now? No?
All good.
Okay. Well, I think we have got a couple of questions which we haven't managed to get around. We are at the end of our time, so thank you everybody for joining us today. I would really want to say a big thank you to Sarah. You're always great to work with, and that your knowledge of the sector is invaluable. So thank you so much for your work on this project. And to all of our panelists, thank you again. Many of you have been involved right from the outset of the research, and again, your guidance through the first draft and beyond has been really great. So thank you so much. Thank you to many people on the session today that helped us get that survey in front of students and encourage them to take part. We are intending to do this research, or do a version of it in about 18 months' time after renters' rights eventually comes in, to really understand how students are faring 18 months in. So we'll really be calling on you all to be involved in that again. And the next step for us is to, now that we've identified all the stakeholders, we will be, as Callum, as Robin has said, get this in front of the people that need to see it, to make sure that we can press forward with the recommendations and try to encourage people to put in place some of those recommendations. So thank you so much, and yeah, thanks again, and see you all soon, I'm sure. Thanks. Bye-bye.